Hey everyone, welcome back. So I have played coming up now on 50 hours of Space Marine 2. Here's my review of the game. I want to start by saying too, there's going to be no story spoilers. I'll also avoid discussing most of the cooler campaign moments so as not to spoil those, but beyond that, I will be talking in detail about the game. I want to begin by setting the tone here for the rest of the video because so much about this game I just adore. They absolutely nailed the gameplay and the Space Marine fantasy. Like the core loop of playing this game, wading into massive hordes of enemies, tearing your way through. It's very satisfying. It's also very, very bombastic. Like there's so much crazy over-the-top action constantly happening. You'll be wading into these hordes of Tyrannid, chopping and smashing your way through with bullets flying everywhere, explosions going off in the background. Off in the distance, there's gonna be streams of literally thousands of enemies tripping over each other. The sky full of swarm clouds of flying Tyrannid with the tracer rounds from anti-air fire relentlessly following their every move. And all of this is happening while you're in the thick of battle, cleaving away, performing some badass execute, tearing the limbs off a space bug and then cratering its head. And you got your mates there right around you, raining their own terror. One of them chugging away, mowing down enemies with his LMG, while the other one is leaping through the air with a jetpack and massive hammer, slamming down into a huge pile, swinging away. It's just non-stop action, and it is like this near constantly in so many different variations of the scenario I just laid out. This game is badass and it is a lot of fun to play. I like the combat, in fact, so much that I could just play through the same missions over and over and over again. And as it turns out, due to the game's relatively low amount of content, that's exactly what we did. We spent most of our time playing through the same handful of missions over and over and over again. And that leads me to what I think might be one of this game's biggest issues at release, and that is the amount and the variety of content available. I'm pretty sure for some people this is gonna fall way short of their expectations. While I have had a lot of fun and I've enjoyed my time with the game so far, the fact that we wrapped up the campaign in just under 6 hours as opposed to the developers projected 12, yeah, there's gonna be some people who just don't love that without question. And for as much as I've enjoyed grinding the co-op operations, leveling up my bulwark and pushing to the highest difficulty, fact is that each run of these takes about 30 or so minutes, and there's only 6 operation levels in total. So for anyone who's only interested in playing through them 1 or 2 times, that's adding 3 to 5 hours more of content. And then between that and the campaign, we are likely falling short of 10 hours total playtime here for some players. Now the game does also have PvP, and I'm really looking forward to it. However, I wasn't able to test that for this review window because the matchmaking servers hadn't yet been turned on. They're still not turned on as of this recording. Now I'm expecting I'm likely to get more hours worth of fun out of this for sure, but I also know for as much as I'm interested in PvP, there are some people who just don't care at all. And these things, combined with a handful of other points of feedback, which we will get to later in the video, this all has me thinking that this could be a divisive launch. I really like the game. I've had a blast so far, and I would recommend it, but I also think people will be disappointed with the content amount and variety because I don't expect everyone to grind the same 6 co-op missions for 40 plus hours like we have. It takes a certain kind of a personality to enjoy that kind of gameplay. So this may unfortunately be once again a situation where we have what is otherwise a great game here that is launching a little too light on its content, and it will be a much easier recommendation, say a year from now, once they've added 4 seasons worth of updates, which they already have planned with a requisite roadmap. At that point, without question, easy recommendation for just about everybody, but as it is right now, I think you're gonna have to keep all the caveats in mind. With that prefaced, let's get into the review, and starting with the overview. If you happen to miss the preview video we did last month, I'm going to do a quick overview of the game from the top to the bottom, talking about the gameplay, the game modes, the systems and features, and then after that we will move into my impressions, what I like, what I don't like, points of feedback, and the final thoughts. All right, starting with the gameplay here, as covered already, this is far and away the shining star of Space Marine 2. The combat is just phenomenal. The main point of comparison for me would be something like Shadow of War. It's got this action combat system where you will be in the thick of battle, totally surrounded by enemies, but you have every tool needed to manage them easily. You're going to be dealing damage with light and heavy attacks, cleaving groups, and striking single targets. There's a lot of combo chains, from spamming the same basic attack multiple times to alternating inputs with holds and pauses in between your strikes. Every single weapon in the game will have its own attack variations with different combos and combo chains that you can perform. And then there are even different weapon variations of the weapon classes, and each of these will either excel at cleave or single target damage, but most weapons will have options to do both to at least some degree. There are also attacks that can be used to break guard or interrupt enemies who are calling for reinforcements, which is huge. As for the defense side of things, well, there are two main options. You've got dodge and parry, and then some classes and weapons also have a block. You can dodge pretty much any attack, but only basic attacks or those that are marked with blue indicators can be parried. Perfectly timing a dodge or a parry right before you are struck will then slow down time momentarily and also enables a counter shot, which will not only do some damage, but also restores some of your health. Then the other big thing that you want to make use of is the finishers. When an enemy is blinking red, this indicates they are low health and can be executed. Doing so will also restore some armor, and it makes you completely invulnerable to damage during the entire execute animation. Then on top of that, there are multiple grenades for you to throw out into the mix, blowing up piles of enemies, and every single class in the game, of which there are 6, has its own unique ability, which is sort of like an ultimate. These will charge in combat and give you another tool to either take out enemies or to support your team. So for example, the class that I played the most, the Bulwark, has this banner that you can slam into the ground. It will damage enemies in its vicinity while also quickly restoring armor for myself and my allies, and I eventually got a perk that made it so that it would revive any down teammates who were around it as well. Really, really powerful utility skill. And with all of this stuff combined, the gameplay just has such a nice pacing and satisfying flow to it. You're smashing through the hordes, mixing up your melee ranged and defensive moves. You'll use these big sweeping cleaves to deal with the hordes, while heavy hitting strikes are for the larger foes. At the same time, you're paying attention for any reactive maneuvers you need to make, like dodging range shots from the snipers, parrying some incoming attacks, and then counter-shotting to restore some armor in the process. Then you're executing the low health enemies, you're getting these sick animations while being invulnerable, and then straight back to it, hacking away, tossing out grenades, dodging, slashing some more, dodging, counter-shotting, heavy attacking to break some guard, parrying, counter-shotting again, perform and execute, some more slashes, counter that reinforcement calling in. Things get a little hairy, toss out some more grenades, I'll slam down my banner to top off my armor and then get back to slashing. It is great. If you hadn't got the memo, combat in this game is great. Space Marine 2's campaign. This has you playing as Titus the Ultramarine, who after being wrongfully accused of corruption has been reinstated and accompanied now by 2 battle brothers who are controlled either by AI or other players if you're playing in multiplayer co-op. You are all sent out on a mission to once again defend humanity. Now in the campaign, you're going to be visiting multiple planets across several missions. Each of these areas have a distinct look, biome, structures, and set pieces you move through while you're battling a wide range of Tyranid and Chaos Marine enemies. As mentioned, not going to spoil any of the narrative stuff here, but I would like to make note of some of the cooler things we saw and did. For one, there's just so many great world building moments throughout the whole campaign, sections where we have time to sort of take in the environment, and they've just done such a good job of executing not only on the oppressive feeling, but also the massive scale of everything in the 40K universe. Whether it's the towering structures that pierce the clouds, the seemingly never-ending waves of enemies pouring through the streets and filling up the skies, your allies and their artillery there to meet them in impressive, explosive fashion, or the massive over-the-top boss battles and encounters. Many, many very, very cool moments we came across in the campaign. There's also, in this, a fair good amount of variety of enemy types, from the basic Tyranid hordes, the run-up and swarm you, the dual-wielding knights, the ranged snipers, the stealth assassins, ones that toss out landmine, bombers that chase you and explode, floaters that support and buff their allies, and then you got the Chaos Marines, or as I like to call them, the ones that explode into cosmic confetti. These had a lot of variations as well, from the basic ranged and swordsmen to the ones with LMGs, rocket launchers, flamethrowers, and missile barrages. You'll come up against several boss battles throughout the campaign, and I gotta say, every one of these I thought was quite well done. Not only were these cool looking bosses with interesting encounter and mechanic design, design, but everyone felt unique. We really enjoyed them. And then beyond the main boss fights, there were also a few, count them 3 to be exact, mini bosses that you encounter at various intervals in the campaign. These are also found in the co-op operations as well, which we will be covering shortly. Probably some of the most fun we had during the whole campaign, though, were all the sections where we had access to our jump packs. These were limited to very particular sequences, and you would lose them once you finish that area. But each time we got to do it, it was so fun, mainly because they're just overpowered as heck. You'll launch up into the air, just floating there, and then smash down wherever you please, and absolutely cratering anything in your path. It is also just extra funny and hilarious when all 3 of you are landing almost in sequence, one after another, just slam, 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 everything's exploding. Overall, I really enjoyed the campaign. All told, though, as mentioned, it took us under 6 hours, actually 5 hours and 46 minutes to be exact. And I'll add here, we weren't burning through the content either. We were playing at a totally regular pace. We cleared every single enemy that spawned. We didn't blitz by anything. We explored all of the side areas looking for collectibles. We watched every cutscene and listened to all of the narrative exposition, of which there was a fair bit. We really did not beeline the campaign. We played it what I would consider fairly normally. I was frankly surprised with how short the campaign was, especially given the developers' 10 to 12 hour completion time estimates that we had heard. Not sure how exactly we could squeeze another 6 hours out of this experience. The campaign was short, but I did find it quite fun. Now, the real bulk of the content in this game, it seems, comes in the co-op operations. Operations are these handcrafted missions where you play as one of 6 distinct classes with up to 2 other real people, moving through levels that act as the side stories to the main campaign. So while you play through the campaign, there are moments and levels and missions in there where there is another Space Marine team going on your same mission, but with objectives in a separate nearby area. The operations are you playing as that team. It's actually a pretty cool setup. So structurally, operations remind me a ton of Warhammer 40k Darktide. They have you moving through pretty much linear levels, fighting groups of enemies that will get mixed up from run to run, with objectives to clear along the path, and occasionally side bosses that need to be dealt with. Now, there are 6 operation missions in total. Like the campaign, these take place on the few planets and in the same general areas, but they are entirely unique layouts and designs. You're not actually moving through the same exact levels and sections that you played in the campaign, but you're in the same rough vicinity on the planets, and you will often see like overlapping points of interest or events off in the background. In fact, the entire point is that these 2 teams are working in tandem to complete the same objective, helping each other by doing different things in the same area. So yeah, you're moving through these levels, you're taking on hordes of either the Tyranids or the Chaos Marines, completing objectives at various intervals, managing your resources, the health and ammo, while trying to stay alive. I would consider every single level of these co-op operations extremely linear, beyond the occasional branching path that meets up like a few seconds later. However, all along the edges of these mostly linear levels, there are a few corners and alcoves branching off where you will find valuable pickups that you want to be on the lookout for. These include health kits, ammo crates, different grenade types, armor boost for getting extra pips of armor, and the Guardian relics, which will let the holder self-revive upon death. Now, sometimes you're just going to see these laying around on the edges, but other times they're actually going to be inside of stacks of crates that you can smash. Also, every level will have a hidden armory data and data seed. So the armory data is used as a resource to permanently upgrade your weapons, making them stronger, where the data seeds reward bonus experience if you complete the mission holding it without dying. And both of those things really incentivize exploring every single corner of the map while on an operation, because they're pretty important. There's also mini bosses. So they're the 4 difficulty tiers that I mentioned. It looks like, from what we could tell, the mini bosses only start appearing as you go to the 2nd difficulty all the way up to the 4th, and they appear to show up randomly, although there are parts of the map where they are probable to show up from what we saw. So the 3 bosses that we've seen in our 40+ hours of playtime include this Neurothrope, a giant floating squid thing, Pulsate's huge AoE rings, got a few range blasts where it shoots big globs or does this sweeping beam. It can also place damaging pools on the ground that you have to avoid. The Carnifex has big melee cleaves, it shoots acid and slams the ground. It also has like a bull rush charge. And then there's the Hellbrute, which charges, has a ton of different heavy melee cleaves, slams, and ranged attacks, and from what I could tell, seems to have a whole heck of a lot of health as well. And that's basically the gist of operations. Go through these levels, complete these objectives, fight these enemies, pick up the pickups, fight the mini bosses when they show up. Do all of that without using your revives and make it to the end. mission complete. So yeah, operations are where we have spent the vast majority, the bulk of our playtime, and I would assume besides the PvP, this will be true for other people as well. This is where most of the content is in Space Marine 2 in terms of quantity of time. You've got the 6 different operations, the 4 difficulty tiers. You start off at tier 1, you play through all 6. These take 30 to 40 minutes each on average, and then as you level up, you get experience, you progress, you're stronger. This lets you push up the difficulty, take on the harder challenge, and progressing even further, which then brings us to the various classes and the progression systems. So as mentioned, there are 6 classes in the game. When you join an operation, you will pick one of the 6 to play as. You've got the tactical, who has a scan ability that reveals enemies and makes them take more damage. You've got the assault class, who has a jump pack, which grants increased mobility for powerful slams. You've got the vanguard with a grapnel launcher. He can hook and propel towards enemies. The bulwark is like the tank. He's got a chapter banner that you place on the ground. It restores armor to all squad members in the area, and then it can get upgrades that do things like damage enemies, increase missing health, and then also revive downed enemies. And his big thing is that he carries this massive shield. The sniper, besides sniping, has a camo cloak to conceal yourself and sneak around. And then you've got the heavy class, who has this iron halo ability, creating a powerful barrier blocking all range damage in front of them, and they just deal a heck of a lot of range weapon damage, which is nice because they have no melee weapon options. So those are the 6 classes, no repeats allowed, so you can't have 2 bulwarks, for example. And progressing through the game is all about picking the class and the weapon combinations you have access to that you like, and then leveling those up to make them stronger and push into those higher tier difficulties. Now, for the rest of progression and customization, it comes in a few forms. For one, there's a perk tree. So every class has its own perk tree. As you level up, you unlock new perks with each level, with 24 in total. And then that tree is divided into 4 subsections. There are the core skills, all around defensive and offensive enhancements. Team skills, as they imply, are going to give buffs to your whole team. The gear skills will enhance your class's unique weapons or ability, which is basically that ultimate. And then you've got the signature skills. These are very powerful buffs at the end of the tree, which are just some really strong things. I've got a couple that makes it so that if my armor depletes, I'll drop a grenade for free. If I get a perfect parry, it will incapacitate even elite enemies. Or I've got one that makes it so that if I have any remaining armor, I cannot be interrupted or staggered, which is very strong. So as you level, you will unlock the perks horizontally across the tree, starting in that top row and then moving to the middle and bottom row. Eventually, at max level 25, you have everything unlocked, and then you can pick one from each of the vertical rows within each of the categories. Then there's also weapon progression. You gain experience as you use your weapons on the mission. This levels them up, and you've got a few upgrades. There are multiple versions of each weapon. You start with the standard one, and then that can be upgraded to Mastercraft, Artificer, and eventually Relic. Each tier of these also have multiple options within them. And then there's also a weapon perk tree with 2 paths for you to choose from. Some have overlapping areas you can swap back and forth, but each one of those trees will have various additional enhancements improving your weapon. And then of course, there are cosmetics. You start with a few default colors as like a base outfit, but then there's tons of unlocks rewarded via playing the game, and you're able to customize everything from the emblem and colors on your helm, pauldrons, breastplate, war gear, gauntlets, and greaves, as well as various adornments you can have on all of that. Weapons will also have cosmetic appearances. These are tied to the look of any weapon upgrade that you've unlocked thus far. And then finally, the game has PvP. This is 6 vs 6 competitive multiplayer with 3 available game modes. There's Annihilation, which is a team deathmatch. Each takedown earns your team a point. First team to 50 wins. Seize Ground is Domination, where you complete for control of a zone that moves around the map throughout the match. You reach the point limit for your team, you win. And then Control and Capture is like that, but it's King of the Hill style with 3 zones in designated areas. And all of this sounds great, especially with how good the combat is in the game. I'm really looking forward to playing it. Unfortunately, we cannot play a single match of PvP during this review window. That's because the matchmaking servers weren't available. There was no way of testing this mode for making this review, which is a huge bummer because this is probably the thing that I was looking forward to the most, even more than the co-op operations. I was really looking forward to PvP, and it could offer a ton of additional playtime. I'm thinking it will, but if there's major issues, it could also suck. No clue as of this recording. We will find out in the coming days post this review going live and the game officially releasing. I am, of course, hoping for the best. best. Okay, so that is the overview of the game. That's pretty much everything you need to know about it. Let's go now into my thoughts and impressions, the likes and dislikes, and the feedback that I have. So starting with the likes, I don't know if you got the memo, but the gameplay, it's really good. Combat, 10 out of 10 as far as I'm concerned. The whole combination of mowing through smaller mobs, clashing with bigger enemies, coupled with the well-timed dodges and perfect counters, it just never gets boring. I think countering in particular feels incredible. Like one of our favorites is when a small enemy jumps at you, you catch them by the head and headbutt them, and then they explode into smithereens, and there's so many like this. A lot of the finisher animations are really fantastic as well, kind of just like this over-the-top deletion of these enemies. Yeah, moment-to-moment combat is what makes this game great, and there aren't many games that do it as well as this. Just absolutely fantastic. Speaking of which, the jetpack gameplay portions of the campaign, 11 out of 10. Super fun stuff. Like the three of us flying around and smashing down, obliterating enemies in massive craters, so very good. Also, man, the world building is on point. I would say kind of similar to how Darktide did last year. The tone of this is just so well done, but I even think it's even better because it's on a much more massive scale with different planets and those huge swarms of enemies and all the stuff going on in the background and all around you. Between the visuals, the sounds, the set pieces, it's just amazing pretty much from start to finish. It really delivers exactly the kind of feel I want when exploring something set in the 40K universe. Love the world building. Also, as I mentioned, just in general, like I feel like they nailed this Space Marine fantasy. You are this lumbering bringer of death, stomping through levels, yeeting everything in your path into another dimension. On top of the fact that all around you, there's also so much of this bombastic, over-the-top, crazy stuff happening. Just playing this game, it feels like the personification of death metal music, basically. Speaking of which, they've got just some super, really cool, badass moments in the campaign. Really good set pieces, explosion, lading, happenings all over the place, with a touch of humor thanks to the often ridiculous commentary from your Space Marine trio. There was actually one point in the campaign where the group of us split up, with one person had to go down this path, and we were on a bridge above them. We had to fight through our own stuff, but also support them while they were down there. Unfortunately, there was only one of those moments in the whole 6-ish hour campaign, and I would have loved more because it was a really cool dynamic with us dealing with our own stuff, but also helping our buddy who was all alone, but we could still see and support. Finally, in terms of the really good stuff, performance was fantastic for me. In fact, I only recall like 1 or 2 moments where there was ever any hitching. It was almost entirely smooth from the beginning to the end with all of the time that I played. Now, I will caveat that by saying, yes, I've got a fairly beefy rig. I've got an RTX 4090, an i9 14900K, and 64 gigs of RAM, so I don't know what it's going to run like on mid-tier systems, on lower-tier systems, on consoles. I really am not sure, but for me, the performance was good. Liam apparently crashed a few times. We did want to make note of that as well. He had a couple of crashes. Okay, now, on to the dislikes. While overall, I really like the game, I think that's come through. I've had a blast playing. There are a fair few points of feedback, critique with some feedback following up. Okay, more game, please. I just want more game to play. The campaign is so short in under 6 hours. The fact that most of the replayability comes from the co-op operation missions is fine. I've enjoyed it, and the PvP I'm assuming I'm gonna enjoy as well. There just should be more. Only 6 co-op missions is very light, and the fact that they're adding additional modes like a horde mode late into 2025, that should have been here at launch. I would have loved it at launch. Like, the gameplay is amazing. I'd love to be doing more of it in a larger variety of situations. I think a year from now, like when, say, the game has 12 missions instead of 6 and more modes, which they do have planned, it's gonna feel a lot better. But right now, yes, it feels quite content light despite the fact that I played for over 40 hours. I've done that because I'm a crazy person, you understand? Multiplayer class progression. This seems unnecessarily slow at the moment. While this is sort of similar to the prior complaint, it's a separate issue than the lack of content variety, because longer leveling grinding doesn't equal variety. It took us roughly 30 hours to cap out a single class. So that means reaching the max level of 25 and getting to that final tier of weapon unlocks, the relic yellow weapons, and unlocking all of them in the tier. That took us about 30 hours each. I think it just would have been more enjoyable if they cut that time, say maybe cut it in half, so that within a 30-hour window, you could level up 2 classes instead of just 1. After over 30 hours running the same 6 co-op missions over and over and over and over again, I don't really feel like leveling another class. You know what I mean? If there was more variety of missions, maybe I would feel differently about that. But 30 hours to get 1 class to max level, it just feels a little too long. It would have been great to have 2 classes or even 1.5 classes leveled up after 30 hours of grinding that. Also, for as good as the combat feels, it has one glaring issue, and that is that the parrying feels a little inconsistent. So on the smaller enemies, basically whenever they have a parry attack coming in, you'll see the blue counter icon appear, and if you hit parry right away, it will successfully counter and smash them, and you get the benefits of that. However, for the larger enemies, hitting parry right when that same icon appears actually won't counter. You actually have to wait until the enemy is physically striking, so you gotta be looking at them, and this is an inconsistency across enemy types using the same blue counter icon. It's just kind of confusing, especially when the enemies are all grouped up, and so you're not sure which of the enemies that blue counterable attack icon is popping up for, and so your timing could be completely off depending on if it's a small one or a big one. Using the parry just felt so unreliable and inconsistent that we basically just ended up spamming dodge roll instead, because you get the same perfect counter if you perfectly time a dodge, but even if the timing isn't perfect, at least you still dodge the damage rather than standing there with a failed parry and then getting hit because you're stuck in that parry animation. I also have a few campaign specific points of feedback. There were several occasions in the campaign where we had these really cool moments that were entirely cinematic, and this would have been so preferable to be playing them. So one great example is there was this point where we were marching into what is basically like death march. Coming up with our tanks, we had other space marines around us. There was massive hordes of enemies pouring in from all over the place, and this greater demon thing standing in the middle. The action of going on this march into this horde of enemies with the huge one in the background, they just showed it in the cinematic, like pew pew shooting. It's like we would have just rather been playing that. It would have been so much cooler playing it. And there were other moments like that throughout the campaign where they decided to make a cinematic for a moment that I would have much preferred to play. I think especially considering the campaign only lasted 6 hours, I would have liked more playtime and less cinematics for those instances for that very reason. In general too, I felt like there was quite a lot of stop in the action, a lot of fading to black and heavy use of corridor walking. And while I understand this is probably used as basically hidden loading screens, it happened frequent enough that I felt like the pacing of the action in the campaign felt really slow at times, far worse than the co-op operations, which are pretty much like non-stop hecticness from the beginning to the end. There was also this strange thing where the weapons would swap between missions and at sections of the missions. So what I'm talking about is like we'd be playing through the campaign and you pick up weapons along the way and you get a weapon you want. Say I got like a bolt rifle with a grenade launcher, awesome, having a lot of fun. And then all of a sudden it would hit a cutscene, but the cutscene would be like you talking to your friends, and then that would end and you would still be in the same area, but all of a sudden you would have different weapons. Like they just randomly removed your weapons and put new ones in your hands, even when it didn't make sense. It's not that time had passed and there was a situation where it made sense that we swapped weapons. This happened frequently enough that it was really, really strange and really off-putting. And I do have one final point of feedback, an FOV slider. For the love of God, please, especially playing on PC, sitting so relatively close to the monitor compared to if I was like on my couch playing on console, looking at a screen multiple feet away. It's just the FOV is so small. It's a killer at times. The fact that my guy takes up almost 1/4 of the screen, it's just a bit much. I would please love an FOV slider. Okay, so all that said, final thoughts. As I've made clear, I think, I really, really like the game. I just wish there was more of it here and more variety here. More co-op missions, different co-op missions, harder difficulties, maybe a longer campaign. Playing through the game moment to moment is so satisfying, but with such a brief campaign, I think the game's legs are clearly held up exclusively behind the co-op operations and the PvP. And even with that said, the amount of extra playtime I'm going to get out of PvP is yet to be determined because as of this recording, we've not been able to test it. And that amount is going to be 0 if you are player who doesn't care about PvP. Now, they do have a roadmap with some great sound and stuff lined up. Before the end of this year, they're going to release Season 1, which includes a sparring arena, which sounds like dueling, as well as private PvE lobbies. And then in Season 2, also before the end of 2024, they're going to be adding new PvE missions, a 5th difficulty, a new enemy, and new pistol. And then in 2025, with Season 3, there's going to be another new PvE mission, a PvP game mode, PvP arenas, new enemies, prestige ranks, and battle barge expansions. And then come Season 4, they're adding new enemies and weapons and also a horde mode, and all of this sounds awesome. It just would have been awesomer if the game had launched with much, if not all of it in place already. I think even excluding everything else, even if they had just had the horde mode available for release, that would have been a huge W and gone a long way for increasing the replayability and the variety of the gameplay experience. Considering again that the campaign only took us just under 6 hours and that we would have seen every operation mission in under a another 3 hours because there's 6 of them and they only last about 30 minutes each. If you are a player who's not interested in grinding those same 6 operations for another 40 plus hours like we have, that's like a sub 10-hour experience worth of content. And if you're also not interested in PvP, that's a big yikes, you know what I mean? Now, clearly, I love the gameplay so much that I wanted to keep on playing, grinding, leveling up my bulwark, and pushing into the higher difficulties. And if that sounds something that you're also gonna like, then awesome. Space Marine 2, easy recommendation from me. However, if you're just planning on doing the campaign and then running each of those co-op missions 1 or 2 times and you're not interested in PvP, you might only be looking at like 10 to 15 hours worth of content, in which case that $60 price tag, that might be a tad too steep. As it stands, it's just the fact is your mileage can vary wildly based on all of the above factors. I think the game right now is quite fun. I like it a lot. I just also think it's clearly going to be way better 1 year from now, assuming they hit their target and release everything listed on their roadmap. While I've enjoyed my time playing the game, I would not be surprised at the same time if there's a decent number of people who are disappointed with it. The developer is just really relying heavily on players grinding the co-op operation classes and weapons to max level, and then playing the PvP for a bit of time to make this feel like it's worth that price tag. If this all sounds great to you, like it is for me, awesome. I think this game's totally worth it. If not though, you might want to hold off until next year. That's going to do it for our review of Space Marine 2. Thank you as always so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see y'all next time.